I never imagined I'd end up in a public feud with my own parents. But when pride and money get involved, family can turn into something unrecognizable. I grew up in a small town where my parents were the kind of people everyone knew, not because they were kind or generous but because they were loud. My dad was always chasing one business idea after another, none of which ever really worked out. My mom loved to talk about how entrepreneurial our family was, but in reality, we were always just scraping by. I spent most of my childhood watching them make big promises and take bigger risks. Every time a new venture failed, they blamed bad luck or jealous people or the economy. It was never their fault. Meanwhile, I learned to work hard and keep my head down, because someone had to be the responsible one. After high school, I didn't go to college. We couldn't afford it and I didn't want to get stuck with loans. Instead, I started working in a bakery. It wasn't glamorous, but it taught me everything I needed to know about running a small business. Customer service, consistency, costs, and most importantly, what people actually want. Over time, I started experimenting with recipes on the side, especially pastries with local ingredients. I began selling a few items at weekend markets and people loved them. That small success gave me a sense of purpose I'd never had before. I decided to take the risk my parents always talked about but never managed to follow through on. I saved every cent I could for nearly 3 years. Then at 27 I rented a tiny storefront and opened my own bakery. It wasn't much, just a cozy space with a few tables, a bright yellow door and my name on the sign, Mara's Bakes. For the first time in my life I had something that was mine. The first few months were brutal. I barely slept, doing everything myself. Baking, cleaning, bookkeeping. My parents didn't help, but they sure liked to talk about how our family finally had a business. They'd tell everyone in town how proud they were, how they raised a business owner. It was harmless at first, almost flattering. But then the bakery started taking off. One of my signature pastries, a honey almond croissant, went viral online after a local food blogger featured it. Overnight, lines started forming outside the door. Orders poured in. For the first time I could breathe financially. That's when my parents decided they wanted to be part of it, or rather take credit for it. It started small. My mom began telling her church friends that she had helped me come up with the recipes. My dad started bragging that he had invested in the bakery, which was an absolute lie. I tried to ignore it. It was embarrassing, but I didn't want conflict. But then they started inserting themselves into things that actually mattered. One afternoon, I got a call from a reporter for a regional magazine. She said she'd been referred to my parents for an interview about how our family built a thriving bakery. Apparently, my parents had contacted her themselves. They told her the bakery was a family business, that I ran the creative side, while they handled finances and strategy. They even posed for photos in front of the store when I wasn't there. When I found out, I felt physically sick. I called them, trying to stay calm, and asked why they would lie about something like that. My mom said it was just good PR, that it made the story sound more inspiring. My dad laughed it off and said, "Don't be ungrateful, we're helping your business get attention." I told them to stop speaking to the press and stay out of my business completely. They got defensive and accused me of being selfish and ashamed of my family. For a while they backed off, or at least I thought they had. A few months later, a local small business association held its annual awards night. My bakery was nominated for Emerging Business of the Year. I was thrilled. It felt like validation for all the hard work, the sleepless nights, the risks that finally paid off. The ceremony was held at a fancy hotel ballroom. I showed up early with my small team. My parents weren't invited. I decided to draw boundaries after everything that happened. When they called the nominees on stage, I felt this rush of pride just hearing my name announced. Then they played a short introductory video for each business. Clips and interviews the organizers had compiled from online sources. When my video came up, I froze. It featured my parents. There they were, sitting in their living room, talking about how they had always dreamed of opening a bakery together, how they taught me everything I know, how they put their savings into helping me start. Every word was a lie. The room applauded as the video ended, and all I could do was stand there, stunned and humiliated. Afterward, one of the event organizers came up to me and congratulated me. I asked where they got that footage. He said it had been submitted by my family. That night I didn't sleep. I felt angry, hurt, and betrayed, but mostly I felt small. My success, something I'd built from nothing, had been twisted into their victory story. For days I debated what to do. A part of me wanted to confront them in person, to scream, to make them feel the embarrassment I felt. But another part of me knew they'd just spin it again, tell people I was being dramatic, or turning against my family. So instead I decided to do what I do best. Let my work speak louder than their lies. The following week I launched a new campaign for the bakery. It was called Built from Scratch. I told my real story, how I'd started with nothing but a dream and a recipe book, how I'd worked 16-hour days alone, how every success came from persistence, not privilege. The post went viral. People loved the honesty. They shared it everywhere. Within days, local news outlets picked up the story, and this time they reached out to me directly. When one journalist asked about my parents' involvement, I told the truth without being cruel. I said, my parents have always been supportive in their own way, but the business was entirely self-funded and self-built. That line changed everything. Suddenly the narrative shifted. People began realizing the truth. The same reporters my parents had courted stopped returning their calls. The small-town gossip turned in my favor. My parents were furious. They accused me of publicly humiliating them. My dad even showed up at the bakery one morning, demanding I issue a statement clarifying things. I told him that I already had. The truth was the clarification. For a long time they didn't speak to me. But deep down I knew this wasn't over. Because when people like my parents feel cornered, they don't apologize, they plot. And I was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to reclaim their success. After my dad stormed into the bakery that morning, things went quiet for a while. Too quiet. I hoped maybe they'd realize they couldn't rewrite my story anymore. Maybe they'd finally let it go. But I should have known better. A few months later, subtle signs of sabotage started to appear. It began with small things. Odd reviews online, complaints about service that didn't match any real customer experience. A couple of one-star ratings said things like, "The owner is rude and ungrateful," or "She doesn't respect her family, don't support her." At first I brushed it off. Trolls exist everywhere, right? But then one morning I came into work and found an anonymous letter taped to the door. It said, "Maybe you should remember who raised you before you get too full of yourself. A little humility could save your business." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. The phrasing, the handwriting, it was my mother's. I felt my stomach twist. Who does that to their own child? I didn't respond. I refused to give them what they wanted, attention. Instead, I doubled down on running the bakery. I hired more help, expanded the menu, and built a stronger online presence. Every week, new customers found us. People drove in from nearby cities just to try the honey almond croissant that started it all. But my parents weren't done. About 2 months later, I got a call from my landlord. He told me he'd received a complaint about health and safety violations at the bakery. I was shocked. My place was spotless. I followed every regulation to the letter. When the health inspector came, she looked confused too. "Someone filed this anonymously," she said. "Usually these things come from disgruntled ex-employees or competitors." We passed the inspection easily, but I couldn't shake the suspicion that I knew who had filed the complaint. I started keeping a quiet record of everything. Every incident, every odd review, every petty act. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted evidence. Then the final straw came. One of my suppliers, a man I'd been working with since I first opened, suddenly called to say he was cutting ties with me. I asked why, and he hesitated before finally admitting that my father had called him, claiming he was co-owner of the bakery and warning that I was mismanaging funds. That broke something in me. I'd spent years trying to take the high road, hoping they'd eventually be proud of me. But I realized that wasn't ever going to happen. They didn't want pride. They wanted ownership. And if they were going to try and destroy what I built, I was done playing nice. I decided to set a boundary so strong it couldn't be twisted. I called a friend of mine who worked in PR and asked for advice. Together we came up with a plan, not to expose my parents maliciously but to protect my name and my business. A few weeks later, I posted a detailed story on the bakery's official page. It wasn't a rant or a personal attack. It was a timeline. I shared photos from the early days, receipts for my initial rent payments, screenshots of my savings plan, and even emails showing I'd started the business alone. Then I wrote, "This bakery was built from late nights, missed weekends, and a dream I refused to let die. It's not a family empire. It's a personal journey, one that belongs to me and the incredible team who's been part of it." I ended with a quote from my grandmother, my mom's mom ironically. "Family isn't who takes credit when you succeed. It's who shows up when you fail." The post spread like wildfire. Customers flooded the comments with love and support. Other small business owners shared similar stories about relatives or friends trying to hijack their success. It hit a nerve, especially in small communities where family reputation is everything. Local media picked it up again. One article even titled the piece, "How One Woman Reclaimed Her Story from Her Own Parents." It went national. By the end of the month, the bakery's online following tripled. Orders skyrocketed. I even got invitations to collaborate with bigger brands, things I never thought possible. But not everyone was happy. My mom showed up one afternoon right before closing time. I hadn't seen her in nearly 6 months. She stood in the doorway looking older than I remembered, or maybe just more tired. "I can't believe you'd humiliate us like that," she said quietly. "Your father can't even go to church anymore without people whispering." I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "I didn't humiliate you, Mom. I told the truth." She looked at me with this mix of pity and resentment. "You could have done all this with us, Mara. We just wanted to be part of your success." That line almost made me laugh. I said, "You could have been, if you'd ever supported me for real instead of trying to own what I did." She didn't respond. She just sighed, looked around the bakery like it was foreign to her and said, "You'll regret cutting family out of your life one day." I told her, "I'll regret letting anyone take credit for my work even more." That was the last time we spoke in person. After that, I focused on moving forward. I stopped checking what people in my hometown said. I stopped defending myself. I poured every ounce of energy into expanding the bakery. Within a year, I opened a second location in a nearby city. The funny thing is, success didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me free. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, and the shaky penmanship told me it was from my dad. Inside was a single page that said, "We may not see eye to eye, but I can't deny what you've done. You built something real. I hope one day you can forgive us for forgetting what that means." There was no apology, not really, but it was something. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I'd finally accepted that closure doesn't always come from a conversation. Sometimes it comes from peace, knowing that you stood your ground and protected what was yours. Now, whenever I walk into the bakery early in the morning, the smell of fresh bread, the hum of the ovens, I remember that version of myself who was scared to dream too big. The girl who thought she needed her parents' validation to succeed. He was wrong. You don't need anyone's permission to build something you believe in. You just need to be brave enough to claim it as your own.